Good morning, all my plant junkies. Grab your coffee. Let's go. I'm going to take y'all to school today on fertilizers because I have been asked so many questions about how I apply these, how I'm using these, how I'm swapping them up, because I hit y'all with certain phrases like, hey, when my tomatoes are in bloom, I stop feeding them as much nitrogen and I up the phosphorus and potassium. And that left a lot of y'all like, how are you doing that? So I'm going to show you exactly how. I'm going to run through all of the fertilizers I use, the cost of them, how some of them are homemade, how to make them, and then I'm going to take you out to the garden before all hell breaks loose from the sky. And I'm going to show you different plant stages of life and when I opt in to use certain fertilizers on them and why I'm using them. Now, y'all know nothing I do on my homestead is fancy. So where do I keep my fertilizers? Outside in a bucket. In a little bucket. Should you? Probably not, because when it gets damp, it causes a lot of issues. So, first up, before I start talking about all these fertilizers, let's go over the fact that your plants need three major key nutrients, which are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Your nitrogen, when it comes to your plants, it more or less helps with all this green leafy growth, right? Your phosphorus helps with the root growth. And your potassium, which to me is the most important, it kind of helps with the transport of all these nutrients. But you want to know what's even more important when it comes to your soil health so that your plants can even access any of these nutrients or nitrogen? Your pH balance. Your pH balance for good loamy garden soil should be about 6.5 to 7.5, right? Pretty neutral. But that's pretty general. One thing you will want to do, especially if you're new to garden, is just kind of do a quick Google search on all your plants. Like this pineapple, I've never grown one of these. I quickly did a Google search to kind of figure out what nutrients it prefers and its pH balance, because not all plants like a neutral state. Tomatoes, on the other hand, or even bell peppers, they like something a little bit more acidic, so they're cool with something that's about 6 to 6.5 on the pH scale. So do yourself the due diligence before you go and buy any fertilizers or get too deep into gardening. Test your soil. See if your pH balance is pretty neutral and start from there. Because if it is not, again, your plant's not going to access any of these nutrients and you will waste time, money, and it'll break your heart. It'll break your heart and have you ready to give up. Now, let's learn some fertilizers. Okay, so number one, this is the nitrogen fertilizer. I cannot give you the full detailed nutrient breakdown of this because I haven't tested it. All I have done is tested it on plants for several years, and what I've found, it is indeed higher in nitrogen. So what is this? This is what we call fermented plant juice. It is essentially just brown sugar and plant material. Weeds that I pulled out of my garden, and half of those weren't even weeds, but I used them because I knew that they were high in nutrients that my plants needed, such as dandelions. So you take all your plant material and you mix it up. Even weight, either you can weigh it or you can do it by volume. But you need even amounts of your plant material to brown sugar. A lot of people ask me, can you use molasses? No, you need something granular because it's going to help in the osmosis process, because that's all you're doing. You're taking and extracting all those plant nutrients into the simple little syrup is what it looks like and smells like. And you let it ferment, and it essentially does kind of turn into alcohol. You'll even hear a little pop or a fizz. Let's see. When you open this, and it is just a thick brown syrup that almost resembles molasses. So anyways, this can be used at a rate of a teaspoon to a gallon up to a tablespoon per gallon. Again, really high in nitrogen, simple to make. Another one that I make at home all the time is bone meal. Bone meal is essentially what it says, bone meal. So we save up all our own bones and from cooking, we throw them in the freezer, and then we have a processing day. It does stink up your home. You bake these at 450 until they basically just fall apart and crumble, and you grind them in so you become bone meal, which is just powder, right? And I'm going to have to wash my hands. You can process bones this way and feed your garden a steady source of all natural phosphorus, or you can buy something as simple as bone meal, which is organic. Now, the cost of this, which was 4 pounds, was anywhere from 12 to 20 bucks. I have a 1,500 square foot garden, and we amended with phosphorus at the beginning of the year. When I looked at my soil test results, we only used a quarter of a bag. So that's pretty cost effective. All right. Nitrogen source that you can make homemade. Here's another one you can make homemade. Blood meal. If you have a homestead or any kind of livestock that you process a lot, here on my homestead, we process what I call mean roosters. I don't breed them into my program. We save the blood from that processing. You can make blood meal because that's all this is dried blood. It's high in nitrogen. You notice 0 on the phosphorus and potassium because it contains none. This is all nitrogen. This is really something that you want to use at the beginning stage of your plant's life or the fermented plant juice. Another nitrogen source, let me grab it, is fish emulsion. You can make fish emulsion. I prefer not to because it is a very stinky process. It's worse than the bone meal. Fish emulsion. And it actually is I know this is reversed, but this is a 5 in nitrogen, 1 in phosphorus, 1 in potassium. Really high in nitrogen. This, or the blood meal are all really good nitrogen source for when your plants are young, right? The fish emulsion will run you anywhere from $8 to $12, and it's still completely full. Bought that this year. The blood meal is going to run you anywhere from $12 to $15, and this is a 5-pound box, and we amended at the beginning of the year, so we have about a quarter of the box left. The murate of potash cost about $16, and this is your potassium source. The reason why I use this is because it's all natural, and we can use things such as banana water, but again, it has to ferment for quite a while, or otherwise you just made banana liquor to feed your plants, which will cause a huge swarm of gnats and a whole lot of other issues. So when you're feeding them potassium, it's best to do it at the beginning of the year when you amend your soil. Now this right here was about 4 to 5 pounds, and I think this one was about $16. We still have over a half a bag. So, and the last one, which is my absolute favorite, this was gifted to me. This is Tiger Bloom. Now this is about 3 years old, and I'm sure by now it's lost some of its shelf life. There's still a quarter of a bottle, and I still use it, and I'm still seeing results. Now, with this one, it is way lower in the nitrogen at a 2, and then the phosphorus at a 8, and the potassium at a 4. So it is indeed higher in potassium and phosphorus. So as you see, I have a mix of granulated, and then we have water soluble. Water soluble is something that the plant's going to be able to access pretty fast. The granulated is something that's going to have to break down in the soil over time. So when people tell you to just throw eggs in with your tomatoes, your next year's harvest or your next year's planting is what's really going to benefit from those eggshells. They take that long to break down. So as a gardener, I'm going to encourage you to utilize organic fertilizers, whether they be homemade or you purchase them organic. So let me take you out here to the garden, and I'm actually going to show you some of the plants that I've recently fertilized, what signs I was looking for in deciding what fertilizers to use, because that can be the tricky part. And here's the garden as a whole, the mini garden and the big garden. The first thing we're going to start with is this chamomile. I harvest a buttload of chamomile every year, and I grow a buttload because I infuse oils, I make soaps with them, like tons of things. So with this chamomile plant, we want it to do what? We want it to produce more blooms. So with this chamomile, when it first started blooming, when it was a tinier plant, I fed it nothing but the nitrogen. But as soon as I started to see blooms pop out, I lessened that nitrogen. So I took away the fish emulsion, and then I started feeding it the Tiger Bloom, which is higher in what? The phosphorus and potassium, and that's what's helping with all of these beautiful blooms. Now, I just harvested this yesterday, and look at it today. And let's go over here to the lettuce. Now, the lettuce, I have only been fertilizing with fish emulsion. And why? Because we want all of this green leafy growth. That's what we're eating. That's what we're harvesting. So we feed this more nitrogen than anything else in the garden. Then let's go over here and look at our bell peppers, to which I just crop rotated because before I had broccoli here. So with these bell peppers, they're obviously not big enough to sustain any peppers yet. So we're picking any blooms off so the plant will focus more on this green leafy growth. So for a plant like this, we're going to continue to feed it the fish emulsion, something that's higher in nitrogen, so it can continue to grow bigger. The bigger the plant, the bigger the fruit, and that is seriously the case with bell peppers. You want a bigger plant so they can produce that bigger fruit and actually hold it. And now we're in the tomato bed. So we have several tomatoes growing out here, and I actually just recently fertilized these. And what I fertilized with was the Tiger Bloom, because these guys are in bloom. We have plenty of green leafy growth. This is an indeterminate tomato. It's going to continue to grow up like a tree anyways. So we pull back some of that nitrogen, and we're making it focus more on the phosphorus and potassium uptake, because that is what's helping set all of those blooms and produce a higher yield. We've done the same over here with the Roma, and look at here, we already have some Roma. Now for things such as the onions, which are a rooted plant, and then we have 238 square feet of potatoes out here. These are all rooted plants that are coming up for harvest in about a month. So we don't want to feed them too much nitrogen, right? We have plenty of top growth. Plenty of top growth for everything to photosynthesize to help with getting those nutrients to the roots. But on these potatoes, we're going to go ahead and quit feeding them as much nitrogen and up more of our potassium and phosphorus, because it's already making potatoes. And all of this green leafy material actually dies completely back, and that's our tall tale sign to harvest those. So there's no use in feeding this. This is going to start to die back. We want it to continue feeding the potatoes. I kind of want to show you some results of swapping out fertilizers. For instance, I just said that we fertilized everything in here with something that was higher in phosphorus and potassium and less on the nitrogen, and you can see the results. Look at all of those nasturtium blooms. And then we go up, we have nothing but pea blooms. So that essentially is causing everything to bust out in blooms, including the calendula.